Hi everyone, welcome back. Thanks for joining us today. We've got a brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. My name is Connor. After years of putting in the work, trying to support my stepchildren, Trevor and Jaden, try to be present in their lives, they looked me in the face and told me I'd never be their real father. And after hearing that, I did the one thing they never expected. Those words they said made me take a step back and finally draw the line, and they never saw that coming. When I first met their mother, Stephanie, I had no idea she had kids, let alone that she'd been married before. She looked so young that you might assume life had been kind to her. Turns out it hadn't. She just carried herself well, despite everything she'd been through. It wasn't until I got emotionally invested that she opened up and told me the full story. Her excuse was that she really wanted to know if I was serious with her before she opened her old wound. According to Stephanie, she had married her high school sweetheart right after college. His name doesn't matter now, but back then, he was everything to her. Young love, full of dreams and plans. But life has a way of testing everybody. The minute things got tough, he turned to the bottle instead of stepping up. Drinking became routine. And when alcohol got into the mix, so did the fights. Stephanie told me there were constant arguments, most of them over money, responsibility, or his disappearances for days at a time. And when yelling no longer seemed enough for him, it became physical. Not often, but enough that she feared for her life. She said the final straw came one night when she caught him screaming at the twins, Trevor and Jaden, just 4 years old then, over something as small as spilled juice. She stood between them and took the verbal beating herself. But that was the moment she knew she had to leave. Not just for herself, but for her sons. She told me, "Connor, I didn't want to be another woman who ended up in the news. I had to get out before one of us ended up dead." By the time I came into her life, the divorce had already been finalized for 2 years. Her ex-husband had long disappeared from any meaningful part of the boys' lives. Even before the court officially separated them, he'd already been emotionally checked out. Missed birthdays. Missed school events. He couldn't even be bothered to show up on weekends. And after the divorce, he basically vanished, didn't visit, didn't call, barely paid the court-ordered child support. It was like he'd ghosted his own kids. By the time she told me about her past, I was already in deep. I didn't pause to reconsider. I just knew I wanted to be with her. And if her kids were part of the package, then that's what I was signing up for. Part of what pushed me to step into that role was my own history. My father died when I was 14 from a heart attack. I remember how that absence shaped my teenage years. I didn't have anyone to show up for my big moments, or even the little ones, because my mother was always working. In some way, I saw a version of myself in those boys, even before I met them. I wasn't trying to be their dad. I just wanted to give them the option to have someone they could count on. Stephanie and I dated for 2 years before I proposed. Every moment with her felt grounded, and for someone like me, who'd seen his fair share of people wearing masks, that was rare. I proposed because I believed it would be worth it. When we got married, Stephanie and the twins moved into my home. Then, one morning, months after, Stephanie told me she was pregnant. I can still remember how my heart jumped when she said the words. It was like all the missing pieces were finally clicking into place. I wasn't just going to be a husband or a stepfather. I was going to be a father in every sense. From that moment on, I made a decision. I'd treat all the kids and the one on the way the same. They were all mine in my heart, and that was enough for me. I helped with homework. I drove them to their soccer practices, and I made sure they had what they needed, not just physically, but emotionally. I worked longer hours, took on extra shifts when I had to, just so I could afford things they'd never had with their biological father, summer camps, family vacations, even birthday parties that felt like something out of a dream for them. I wanted them to feel cared for. They never called me dad, and to be honest, that stung a little. But I never pushed it. I figured respect couldn't be demanded, it had to be earned. I thought that one day, they'd look back and connect the dots. Their biological father started popping up again after he got wind that Stephanie and I got married. I couldn't tell if he genuinely wanted to fix things, or if he just didn't like the idea of another man stepping in. But I reminded myself I wasn't doing this for him. I was doing this for the boys. Even if their father's sudden appearances made things awkward, I never said a bad word about him. But as they got older, somewhere around 13 or 14, I started noticing small changes. The kind you want to ignore at first, as you assume it's just a phase. But they weren't. Trevor and Jaden started pushing back in little acts of defiance, ignoring curfews, talking back when I tried to enforce rules, brushing off basic responsibilities. And they even started telling my son, their half-brother, that they weren't really related, that he wasn't truly family, because they didn't share a dad. When I found out, I was crushed. I sat them down to talk, to clear the air, to get through to them like a father would. But they wouldn't even meet my eyes. They sat there with their arms folded, eyes on the floor. Like my words didn't matter. Things kept spiraling from there. They'd come home late without explanation, break house rules, and act like I had no say in anything. One night, during an argument, they went as far as to tell me they'd leave the house altogether, that I wasn't the only one who owned it. I remember standing there, just staring at them, wondering where all this anger came from and who they were becoming. I brought Stephanie into it, hoping she'd help reel them back in. And to her credit, she did speak up. She told them how different their lives would be if I hadn't stepped in. She reminded them of the sacrifices I'd made. For a brief moment, I thought maybe things would turn around. But they didn't. Instead, anytime things got uncomfortable, they'd pack a bag and head to their biological father's place. It felt like every time I tried to discipline them or set a boundary, they had a backup escape plan. And just like that, our bond started unraveling, thread by thread. I stayed quiet through most of it, hoping they'd come around. But the truth is, love without respect, it can only stretch so far before it snaps. I had been putting money aside for the twins' college education long before they even hit high school. I did it quietly, month by month, because that's what a father figure should do. I just wanted to make sure that when the time came, they wouldn't have to struggle the way I did. I wanted them to have options, to aim high, to chase something better than what life had handed them in the beginning. Stephanie knew about the fund, of course. She always told me how thoughtful it was, how rare it was for a man to take in another man's kids and love them enough to think 10 years ahead. I appreciated that. It wasn't until after a quiet family dinner one evening that Stephanie decided to bring it up to the boys. She casually mentioned that the fund I'd built was enough to cover their full tuition at some of the best colleges in the state. She said it like it was good news, expecting they'd be excited or grateful to hear. They didn't even look up from their plates. Trevor just said, "Okay." Jaden followed with a shrug. Then they got up, cleared the table, and walked off. No thank you or appreciation. I sat there for a few seconds, wondering how they could care so little about anything I'd done. Stephanie saw my face. She gave me that awkward little smile and said, "Teenagers. You know how they are. They don't always say thank you, but it doesn't mean they're not grateful." I didn't say anything. A few weeks later, the acceptance letters came in. They had both gotten into one of the best colleges in the state. I won't lie, I was proud. Even after everything, I still wanted good things for them. I thought this would be the turning point, and they'd realize someone had their back all along. Instead, what I got was a list. A list of things they expected me to buy for them before they left. Laptops, new phones, clothes, and most importantly, 2 separate cars. One for each of them. I told them no. I told them that I was already covering their entire college education, and that they hadn't even acknowledged that. I said, "Why should I spend thousands more when you haven't once said thank you for the tens of thousands I've already committed?" That's when Trevor exploded. He said, "You're not even our real dad. Why do you expect us to constantly praise you like you are?" Jaden chimed in right after. "Yeah, you always act like we owe you something just because you're paying for college. It's like you're holding it over our heads." I couldn't believe they said that out loud. I looked over at Stephanie, hoping for her to say something to shut this down. But she didn't. She just sat there. Her face gave her away, though. She wasn't on their side, but she wasn't on mine either. She was stuck somewhere in the middle. And in that moment, that was almost worse than her agreeing with them. I didn't argue or raise my voice. I just stood up, walked out of the dining room, and closed the door to our bedroom behind me. Years of trying to maintain peace while they grew colder. Years of giving them chances, making excuses for their behavior, and watching them pull further away. That night settled it all. No matter how much I gave, it was never going to be enough. And if I wasn't their real father, then maybe it was time I stopped pretending I was. The next morning, I woke up before the sun, logged into the account where I'd been stashing away money for their future. It had grown over the years. All I could think was, why am I the only one making sacrifices for kids who don't even see me as family? I liquidated the entire fund, transferred it into my personal mutual fund account. I canceled their upcoming tuition payments, removed myself as their financial guarantor. I wasn't going to sit back and keep funding a future that came with zero respect. Before leaving for work, I called Trevor and Jaden into the living room. They walked in with the same entitled attitude. I told them exactly what needed to be said. "You're right," I began, looking them both in the eye. "I'm not your real dad, so I'm stepping back. From now on, your real father can handle what's ahead. Best of luck." They didn't say a word. Maybe they didn't think I was serious. I turned, grabbed my keys, and headed for the door. That's when Stephanie finally decided to speak. She hadn't said a single word the night before, but now she was furious. "You're punishing the kids," she snapped. I stopped at the door and turned to her. "No," I said quietly but firmly. "I'm finally listening to them." They had made their choice loud and clear. They had a father. They wanted him to be the one they respected. They wanted him to show up. So now he could, and I am done giving to people who only knew how to take. When I came home that evening, their rooms were empty. Trevor and Jaden had packed up and left in the middle of the day, angry and defiant. I didn't ask Stephanie where they went. I didn't need to. I knew exactly where they were, back with their biological father. I didn't reach out because I had given them everything I could. And in return, they made it painfully clear that I was just the guy married to their mom. Nothing more. So I let them go. If they believed their real father could do better, then let him. 3 months passed. Stephanie tried to play the middle ground for a while, but eventually, the weight of the consequences caught up with her. One evening, she stood in front of me, her voice low and almost pleading. She said, "Maybe it's time to reconsider. They've been struggling. They can't get back into school because their fees weren't paid." I listened. I didn't interrupt. And when she was done, I simply said, "My decision is final." It wasn't out of spite. It was out of principle. You can't spit on someone's hand and then expect them to keep feeding you with it. Because the tuition hadn't been paid, the boys missed the registration deadline. Their college admission offers were revoked. They lost their place at one of the best schools in the state, something I had planned and prepared for years before they even understood what college meant. Then came the unexpected evening. I had just gotten off work, but when I opened the door, I froze. Trevor and Jaden were in my living room. I didn't speak right away. I just stared at them, and they looked back at me with shame. The second they saw me, they stood up, and then, right there, they started apologizing. They begged me to let them come back. They said they were sorry, said they hadn't realized how much I'd done, said their dad wasn't who they thought he was. I wanted to stay mad. I had every reason to. But looking at them, something in me let go of the anger. I told them they could stay, but I made one thing very clear. This house runs on respect. You don't have to call me Dad. But if you ever disrespect me again, this door closes for good. They both nodded. I made one thing very clear. I wasn't paying for their college anymore. If they wanted to go to school, they could take out student loans like millions of other kids or get jobs and work their way through it. I didn't cancel those tuition plans to be petty. I did it because I needed them to understand that love doesn't mean unlimited sacrifice, especially not in the face of open disrespect. I had been their safety net for years. But you can't keep catching people who are busy cutting the ropes that keep you suspended. Stephanie asked me to reconsider. I just looked at her and said, "You stood there in silence when they disrespected me. So now I expect you to keep that same silence while I set my boundaries." I meant every word. And she understood me, maybe not happily, but deeply. The truth is, I still love those boys. I don't have it in me to hate them. But I'm also done trying to earn love or approval from people who only see me as convenient. I'll continue to keep this home stable. I'll continue to be firm and fair. But this house now runs on mutual respect. Looking back, I know I gave it everything I had. I didn't fail as a stepfather. I just finally stepped back from a role where I was treated like an unpaid extra in someone else's show.